Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of The Cinema Scholar. I'm the Cinema Scholar, and I'm here to talk about movies. Every week, I'll post a new video reviewing and analyzing recent movies and TV shows through the eyes of a college film student. In my analysis, I'll focus on a specific cinematic technique or story element and how it serves or doesn't serve the film as a whole. I'll also be reviewing the film in its entirety. My goal for this show is to entertain and educate the audience on the filmmaking process and film theory in the context of modern film and television. Film studies shouldn't mean confinement to the same best movies ever list when the medium has long since moved on. So let's not delay any further. Our first subject is The Hobbit. As I'm sure you already know, the production team decided to expand Tolkien's simple, relatively uncomplicated bedtime story into 3 movies, using material taken from Tolkien's Book of Unfinished Tales and the appendices of the Lord of the Rings books. Before I went into the movie, I expected the plot to feel stretched so thin you could spread it on a sandwich. After all, there's a reason Tom Bombadil never showed up in Fellowship of the Ring. It would have killed the pacing and made us feel vaguely violated by a strange bearded man who abandons the characters in the middle of the forest and steals all of their clothes. No, seriously, that happens. If Lord of the Rings movies had been more like the books, there would have been about 20 minutes of singing, drinking, and dancing for every 5 minutes of epic fight scene. And I like epic fight scenes. And I like singing, drinking, and dancing too, but, there's a time and a place for that, and it's in a musical. Epic fight scenes are where it's at. After seeing it today, I can definitely say that I like The Hobbit. All the stuff I loved about Lord of the Rings is in there to some extent. Right from the beginning, we're given emotional context for the quest when Smaug the kick-ass dragon swoops down and cooks the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain to a fine crisp. Just like in Jaws, we never actually see the dragon in full, only bits of wing and bursts of flame. This allows us to project our own impressions of what a terrifying dragon looks like onto a blank space. I imagine it also saves some money on the CGI. From there, Bilbo Baggins, a group of dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield and Gandalf the Grey, set out on a quest to give the dragon what for and claim a treasure. The fight scenes all have incredibly good cinematography and editing. The cinematography lets you know where every character is in relation to each other at all times, and the editing actually lets you see what the hell's going on. Contrast that with modern action movies like, say, Batman Begins, in which every punch gives its own little close-up that lasts about a quarter of a second of screen time, making the whole thing seizurific and hard to follow. The effects are all fantastic. The orcs, trolls, and goblins look as unpleasant as they should, especially one guy who appears near the end who I've started calling King Scrotum Face for rather self-evident reasons. The effects used to create the battle sequences are so good that I can't tell where the CGI ends and the actors begin. Gollum returns with the same wonderfully expressive animation that everyone loved in Lord of the Rings. Andy Serkis gives another great performance as per usual. Rivendell looks especially wonderful. The shots of the entire valley use the same combination of matte paintings, CGI, and models that looked so awesome in Lord of the Rings. The New Zealand countryside looks absolutely beautiful. You can almost see the entire history of Middle-earth unfolding in every shot because it just looks like the kind of place where orcs and elves might conceivably be found. The plot is decent for the most part. It is based on a literary classic, but there are a few moments I thought were just bullshit. It seems as though almost every fight ends with a deus ex machina courtesy of Gandalf, who magics away every problem they come across just as it looks like all is lost. I honestly have no idea why the dwarves don't just stick to Gandalf at all times and use him as a massive bearded shield. Even the final fight scene is resolved in this way. I counted at least 2 Deus Ex Machina, and there might have been even more. This is not so much a problem with the movie itself and more with the source material. The way the script is, the characters don't overcome adversity with their own strength. They overcome adversity whenever Gandalf remembers he's a wizard. Other than that, it's all fine. The characters are all memorable, which is no easy task when you have 13 party members to characterize. Despite their personalities in the book being all basically one line apiece, none of the dwarves come across as cardboard cutouts. Every single one of them gets a unique visual design and an interesting performance, and I guarantee you'll have a personal favorite by the end of it, even if you can't remember his name. Gandalf is still a wise, imposing badass, but that's par for the course at this point. Martin Freeman turns in a wonderful performance as Bilbo, whose character arc forms the emotional focus of the story as he has to prove himself to the dwarves and discover his own spirit of adventure. Sylvester McCoy, who you may know as the Seventh Doctor on Doctor Who, turns in a pretty decent performance as Radagast the Brown. You can tell he's having a lot of fun with this role. But what about the pacing I was so concerned about? Well, it's not actually a problem in this one. It never feels padded because every single time things start to feel a bit slow, there's a massive action set piece that usually moves the plot along. The exception is the climb up the mountain. The stone giant sequence did not advance the plot in the slightest, and its only connection to the rest of the movie was to give Thorin a reason to doubt Bilbo's usefulness in the company of dwarves. But we already know he doubts Bilbo's usefulness from 1,000 other lines, so this sequence was completely unnecessary to the plot and character arcs. My concern is that at this rate, we appear to be halfway through the book and only a third of the way through the movies. At this rate, Smaug will be dead by the end of the second movie, so what the hell happens in the meantime? Does Bilbo just walk back to the Shire for the entire runtime of the third movie? I hope not. And this is the problem with multi-film adaptations of single works. Let me ask you something. What is the point of The Hobbit? The dwarves contact Bilbo. Dwarves say, let's kill us a massive dragon and claim his treasure. Bilbo defeats the dragon, finds the ring, gives the ring to Frodo, sets up Fellowship of the Ring. End of story. It really is not all that complex. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows started this trend of single novels being split into multiple films, so let's talk about why it worked there. The first half got all the exposition and plot elements out of the way, so the second half could really focus on milking the siege of Hogwarts and all the other awesome stuff. The point of splitting the films was to fit an enormous amount of detail into a small space. The Hobbit is going to find itself stretched so thin that they need to add all the other stuff that didn't belong anywhere in the books just to justify this decision. Now, think back to Breaking Dawn Part 2. Breaking Dawn, another book that was adapted into 2 parts. According to every review I've seen, and no, I've never seen the movie, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot cattle prod, the only plot movement happens in the first 20 minutes and last 10 minutes of Part 1, as well as the last hour of Part 2. This is because it's a Twilight movie, and therefore the plot is so simple it's insulting. As a result, the film was an even bigger travesty than the previous films. I'm not comparing The Hobbit or Harry Potter to Twilight. I'm comparing a good use of a filmmaking tool to a bad use. I'm saying that everything in a movie needs to contribute in some way to the main plot, main characters, or the main themes. The plot of The Hobbit is, there's a dragon over there, let's kill it. It is not so complex that it needs 3 movies. It's a bedtime story, for God's sake. So at the end of the day, The Hobbit is an extremely well-made movie with great action, great direction, great effects, and great performances that does a decent job justifying its length, but it represents a negative trend towards fragmenting stories for their own sake, rather than either telling one self-contained good story, or using the additional runtime to do some actual good, as was done in Harry Potter. If the extraneous stuff concerning the rise of Sauron was cut out and replaced with the second half of the book's plot, it would not have negatively affected the overall quality of the film. So, this has been the first episode ever of The Cinema Scholar. I'll see you soon for Les Miserables.